She told me she didn't need me on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because the Veth Council had just delivered their weekly resource allocation report, and Commander Saris had spent 40 minutes explaining to me why humanity's diplomatic mission was consuming more oxygen than its treaty provisions allowed. I'd nodded through the entire meeting, nodded through the lunch that followed, and then walked through the long glass corridor of Orbital Station Meridian to the observation bay, my usual escape, only to find Lieutenant Erin Voss standing at the curved window with her arms folded across her chest and that look on her face. The one I'd learned over 7 months aboard this station to be very careful around. She was looking out at the gas giant we orbited. Its amber bands rotated slowly, indifferent to everything happening above its atmosphere of compressed hydrogen and frozen ammonia. I'd heard the Veth considered it sacred. I'd heard they considered a lot of things sacred. Erin didn't care about sacred. She cared about mission parameters and caloric intake ratios, and the fact that I kept leaving my maintenance toolkit in the secondary corridor. "We need to talk," she said without turning around. I'd come in quiet. She'd heard me anyway. She always did. "Sure," I said, and sat down on the bench that ran along the inside curve of the observation bay, a thing bolted to the station wall and worn smooth from years of personnel doing exactly what I was doing, finding a place to breathe. "What's on your mind?" She turned then. Erin Voss was a compact woman, sharp-edged in the way that came from 15 years of running lean in environments that punished waste. Her hair was cut short on one side, longer on the other, a style that had started as practical and stayed because she didn't care enough to change it. She had the kind of gray eyes that registered everything and showed only what she decided to show, which was usually less than what she'd registered. Her jaw had a set to it that I had cataloged by the time of this conversation into roughly 4 distinct configurations, each one meaning something different. This one meant, "I have thought about this. I am not changing my mind." "You've been hovering," she said. I opened my mouth. "Not now," she said. "I mean in general. For the past 3 weeks, you've been finding reasons to be wherever I am. You stayed late in the engineering bay last Thursday when you had no reason to be there. You rerouted your morning calibration walk to pass through my workstation twice in the same hour." "That's not." I counted. I closed my mouth. She sat down on the far end of the bench, keeping the distance deliberate, in the way she kept most distances deliberate. Outside, a Veth cargo hauler coasted silently through the dark on its way toward the station's upper docking ring. Its running lights pulsed in long, slow intervals. The Veth used a pulse pattern that mimicked their own bioluminescent signaling, which I'd read about in our pre-deployment cultural briefing, and had found interesting until I'd arrived here and learned that almost everything in the briefing was technically correct and experientially useless. "I don't need you checking on me," she said. "I'm not struggling. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm doing my job, and you following me around is starting to make me feel like you think I can't." "That's not what I think." "Then what do you think?" I didn't have a clean answer for that. The honest answer was tangled up in things I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet, and Erin Voss had no patience for half-formed thoughts. She had even less patience for sentiment dressed up as concern. "I think," I said carefully, "that I like being around you." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was even, not cold, just precise the way she was precise about everything. "I know that's the problem." She looked back at the gas giant. "I'm not in a place for that right now. I don't know if I will be. What I do know is that I need you to stop treating this posting like it's something it isn't. We have a job to do. The Veth-Terran cooperation framework has been live for 18 months, and we are still, every single day, one misunderstanding away from watching it collapse. I need my head clear. I need my team's head clear." She looked at me directly. "I need your head clear." "It is clear." "Then prove it. Give me space. Stop hovering. If I need you, I'll ask." I looked at her for a moment. She held the look with the particular stillness she had, not the stillness of someone who'd gone cold, but the stillness of someone who'd made up their mind and was waiting for the room to catch up. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. I got up and left. And I stayed. Not in the way she meant, not hovering. I stayed on the station. I stayed in my role as humanity's lead integration specialist, the peculiar title they'd invented for the peculiar job of making sure humans and Veth could share 50,000 square meters of orbital infrastructure without killing each other over toilet protocol and airlock sequencing. I stayed because the work needed doing and because, if I was being honest with myself in the quiet hours when the station's ventilation settled into its low night cycle hum, there was no version of leaving that made any kind of sense. We were 8 months from the end of this posting. The framework needed the full team. You didn't walk away from that because a woman told you she needed room to breathe. So I gave her room. I rerouted my calibration walks. I stopped lingering in the engineering bay. I sat on the opposite end of the table in briefings and kept my eyes on the briefing material, and not on the way she argued with Commander Saris, which she did quietly and thoroughly, and in a way that always left Saris looking like he'd reached for something and found his hand empty. I did my job. I learned Veth gesture language, starting with the formal register and working down toward the conversational, which was harder and funnier and more rewarding. I mediated 14 separate disputes between human crew members and Veth Station, administrators over resource allocation, waste processing, and the complex social etiquette surrounding the Veth custom of scent-marking personal workspace, which the humans kept confusing for a malfunction, and the Veth kept finding incomprehensibly rude. I ate in the shared mess, where the humans and Veth ate side by side with varying degrees of enthusiasm, and where I had, after 4 months, found a Veth crew member whose taste in what passed for music ran parallel enough to mine that we sometimes sat at the same end of the table and listened to each other's audio feeds. I attended the cultural exchange sessions that most of my colleagues avoided. I watched the gas giant rotate from my bunk window on the nights I couldn't sleep, which was most of them. I learned its bands by heart the way you learn the layout of a room you live in, without trying, without noticing, until one day you find you can navigate it in the dark. 2 weeks after the Tuesday conversation, the Veth administrator Tesavok stopped me in the main corridor and performed the long, slow bow that meant they had something considered to say. Tesavok was one of the older administrators on the station. Their outer integument had faded from the deep copper of youth to a burnished bronze that caught the station's artificial light in ways I found genuinely beautiful, though I'd learned not to say this because complimenting a Veth's integument before the appropriate relationship stage was the equivalent of commenting on a stranger's age in a way that was simultaneously too intimate and too clinical. They moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned, over the decades, that speed was rarely the answer, and that most urgencies resolved themselves if you let them. Their sensory tendrils rested loosely at their temples, reading the air with the continuous low-level attention that Veth maintained as a matter of biology. They were always reading something. I returned the bow. I'd got the angles right by now. "The human woman," Tesavok said. Their translator rendered their voice as a measured baritone, which I suspected was not what they actually sounded like. "Voss. She has made the 3rd formal correction to the framework's hazardous materials handling protocol." "I know," I said. "The 2nd and 3rd revisions were mine." Tesavok's tendrils shifted. "Consideration, we accepted them." "I know that too." "The council finds her correction sound," Tesavok said. "They also find her tone difficult." "Her tone is who she is," I said. "The corrections are also who she is. You can't have one without the other." Tesavok was quiet for a moment. Their tendrils drifted in slow consideration. "We understand this," they said finally. "We are simply noting it. We note it because we are interested in it. Humans are complex." So our Veth, I said. The bow they gave me then was slightly different, shorter, held a fraction of a second longer. I'd only seen it once before, in the cultural archive we'd been given access to during orientation. It meant something like, point conceded and acknowledged. Among the Veth, formal acknowledgement of a conceded point was considered a meaningful gift, not a social nicety. I'd had to explain to several human crew members why the Veth seemed to take losing arguments so graciously. The answer was that they didn't think of it as losing. They thought of it as receiving. I went to my bunk that night and lay on my back staring at the ceiling and thought about nothing in particular for a long time. Through my bunk window, the gas giant's amber bands moved in their slow rotation. There was something I found steadying in that. The planet didn't know I was watching. It was just doing what it did, had been doing for billions of years, would keep doing long after the station and everyone on it was gone. The indifference of it was, strangely, a comfort. 4 months after the Tuesday conversation, I did something I hadn't planned. It was a night cycle shift, and I was on the engineering bay's secondary maintenance roster, which nobody actually wanted but which I'd taken because it gave me something to do with the hours I wasn't sleeping. The bay was quiet at this hour, just the ventilation and the deep structural sounds of a station that was, despite all appearances, not sitting still, constantly adjusting, compensating for thermal differentials and gravitational tides, and the slow drift that all orbital structures experienced, and that the automated systems corrected without anyone noticing except the people who worked with the numbers. I was recalibrating a faulty atmospheric sensor when Erin came in. She didn't say anything. She went to the adjacent console and pulled up something she'd clearly come specifically to look at, because she had the focused expression she wore when she was following a thread, not browsing. She stood there for about 20 minutes, making notes in the small, precise handwriting she used when she wasn't thinking about her handwriting. I finished the sensor and moved to the next one. She looked up. What are you recalibrating? Bay 4's atmospheric array. 2 sensors are reading slightly outside tolerance, probably thermal drift, but it's better to recalibrate than log and ignore. She looked at the array. The variance on sensor 12 has been there for 3 weeks. I flagged it in the Thursday log. I know, that's why I'm here. She went back to her notes. I finished sensor 12 and moved to 13. You should eat something, I said. She looked up sharply. It's been 8 hours since dinner shift, I said. I can tell because you're doing the thing where you move your pencil between your fingers without noticing. You do that when your blood sugar is low. She looked at her pencil. It was moving between her fingers. She stopped it. Don't do that. Observe things. Observe me, she said, like I'm a system to be monitored. I'm not monitoring you, I said. I've just been working alongside you for 8 months. I know your tells. I put down my calibration kit and went to the storage locker at the back of the bay where the night shift crew kept emergency rations. I found a protein bar and set it on her console without comment. She looked at it, she looked at me. She picked it up and ate it, still looking at her notes. We didn't talk for the rest of the shift. But when she left, she paused at the bay door and said, without turning around, "The sensor array on the upper ring is worse than bay 4. Someone should check it." "I'll put it on the morning roster," I said. She left. I stood in the empty bay for a moment, then picked up my calibration kit and went to the upper ring. 3 months after the protein bar, which neither of us ever mentioned, the Veth deep scan vessel detected anomalous gravitational readings in the outer system. This was the kind of thing that, 18 months earlier, would have produced a brief notation in the Veth Council's quarterly report. Now it produced a 48-hour briefing cycle, because the framework required joint assessment of anything that fell within 100 AU of shared patrol territory, and shared patrol territory had expanded significantly in the past year. Expansion was a success metric. It was also, I had found, a source of new and previously unanticipated complications at a rate that defied reasonable prediction. I spent most of those 48 hours in the briefing room, which was the largest room on the station and still too small for the number of people who needed to be in it. At some point in the second day, someone brought in supplemental seating, and I found myself in a row of folding chairs along the back wall between Petty Officer Delacroix, who kept falling asleep and snapping awake again with the practiced grace of someone who'd spent years learning to sleep in meetings, and the Veth analyst Kairavas, whose name I'd finally stopped mangling 2 months in, and whose ability to summarize 2 hours of council discussion into a single gestural phrase was something I deeply admired. Erin was at the front of the room. This had become her place. She'd arrived at it gradually, through accumulated competence, through the Veth habit of naturally orienting toward whoever in a room understood what they were talking about. She was working through the gravitational data with the Veth chief scientist Amaveth, whose tendrils moved almost constantly when they were engaged. Not nervous movement, but active, expressive, the physical manifestation of a mind sorting data in real time. The readings, it turned out, were a dense field of micro-singularities. Natural formations, Amaveth explained in the patient, unhurried way of someone who expected confusion and was prepared to meet it with goodwill. The Veth had catalogued 67 such fields across their surveyed space. They had a name for them that translated roughly as resonance drift, points where space itself remembered earlier shapes, where the geometry of ancient catastrophes still echoed in the local fabric of spacetime. The word they used had the same root as the Veth word for memory, and also for the marks left on a Veth's integument by an old injury. Places where experience persisted past the event that created it. Erin asked, "What happened if you flew a ship through one?" Amaveth said, "Nothing, usually. The resonance doesn't interact with mass, it interacts with signal." Erin looked up from her display. "What kind of signal?" "Any kind," Amaveth said. "Communications, bioelectric, electromagnetic. Within a resonance drift field, signals are amplified and reflected in ways that we do not fully understand. A signal sent through a drift field does not arrive where it was sent. It arrives where it was meant." I saw Erin's expression shift. Not much, she didn't give much. Just a slight recalibration around the eyes. The internal reorganization of someone who'd heard something that mattered and was deciding how much to let it show. "Can it be predicted?" she asked. "The amplification, the destination?" "No," Amaveth said. "That is part of what makes it interesting." I wrote down what they'd said. I wasn't sure why. The notes I kept in briefings were practical, action items, follow-up questions, things I'd need later. This was different. It was the kind of thing you write down because it feels like it might mean something you haven't worked out yet. The incident happened 6 weeks later. A Veth patrol vessel, a small 3-being crew running a standard sweep of the outer boundary, encountered a technical failure during a debris survey and sent a distress signal. The signal went through the resonance drift field. It arrived in 17 places simultaneously. 12 of those places were uninhabited monitoring points that logged the signal without anyone there to receive it. 3 were Veth monitoring stations, which received it with appropriate urgency and began organizing a response. 1 was Orbital Station Meridian, which should not have received it at all, given that we were well outside normal comm range for that patrol corridor. I was in the engineering bay when the signal hit. Every display in the bay lit up at once, a cascade of amber that painted the walls in warm light. A moment later, the general alert sounded. I ran. The situation room was controlled chaos, everyone moving with purpose, but 15 people's purposes operating at different tempos and not yet synchronized. Commander Saris was at the central console. The senior Veth administrator Pralovas was standing very still in the way I'd learned to recognize, the way that meant they were receiving information directly through their tendrils, bypassing the translator entirely, which happened when information was too urgent for even a fraction of a second's delay. Aaron was already at the comm station, headset on, talking to someone. I found a terminal and pulled up what I could. The distress signal was fragmentary. The drift had amplified and scattered it, the way a shout in an empty room becomes impossible to locate. But the location data was clear. The patrol vessel was drifting in a debris field 3 AU from our position, engines offline, with a hull breach in the secondary compartment. 3 beings, unknown injuries, 2 standard hours until Veth rescue vessels could reach them. Aaron pulled the headset off and turned to Commander Saris. Her voice was flat and fast, the voice she used when she'd already done the analysis and just needed authorization to act. The Station 2 shuttle has a rated emergency burn range of 4.8 AU. We're the closest asset with boarding capability. The Veth response is already mobilized, Saris said. Their response is 2 hours out. Our shuttle is 22 minutes out at emergency burn. She pulled up the trajectory on the central display. It materialized as a clean arc, short and direct. One of the hull sections is venting atmosphere. 2 hours is too long. Saris looked at the display. He looked at Perlovas. Perlovas said through the translator, "We would accept the assistance," which in Veth diplomatic language, the formal, restrained language of the public register, meant something close to, "please and quickly." Saris gave the authorization. Aaron was already moving. I followed without thinking about it. She didn't say anything until we were in the shuttle bay, pulling emergency suits from the wall lockers, and then she said without looking at me, "I need a second pilot." "I know," I said. "Can you handle the docking sequence manually? Their automated systems may be offline." "I've run the simulation 40 times." "I know." She sealed her helmet. "Let's go." The burnout was 19 minutes. We didn't talk much. The shuttle was small and fast, designed for exactly this kind of sprint. Its emergency thrust capacity had never been used in the year and a half since it was installed, and it turned out to be considerable. The stars moved differently when you were moving fast. I'd read that once as a child, in a book about space that simplified things in the way books for children do, and had filed it away as the kind of thing that was probably poetic rather than true. It turned out to be both. The Veth patrol vessel was spinning slowly when we reached the debris field. It was a small, elegant thing. Veth ship design had an organic quality that human ships lacked, a tendency toward curves and asymmetries that I'd found strange at first and now found simply beautiful. One side was dark, unpowered. The other still had running lights, blinking in the long intervals I'd learned to associate with Veth distress signaling. Slow, patient, continuous. I am here. I am still here. "Docking approach," Aaron said. Her voice on the comm was steady. "I need a manual lock on their secondary port." "I see it." The secondary port was on the dark side, which meant no automated guidance. I brought the shuttle around, reading the vessel's spin, watching the port cycle in and out of alignment, calculating the window. "Don't rush it," she said. "I'm not," I said. "I know," she said, and there was something different in those 2 words, not instruction, closer to assurance. The difference between "I know, so don't" and "I know, so I'm saying it so you know I know." The lock caught on the 3rd pass. It shouldn't have. The docking collar had been damaged, and the secondary port was misaligned by 4 degrees that the manual sensors kept flagging as a reason to abort. I held the contact, and Aaron hit the manual seal override, and the readout went from amber to green. "Nice," she said quietly, in the tone she used when she meant more than the word contained. We cycled through in suits. The interior of the patrol vessel was cold and dark and smelled, through the suit filters, of something sweet and faintly acidic, the Veth's distress biochemistry, which their bodies released automatically when injured, a biological signal to their own species that functioned as a kind of involuntary call for help. All 3 crew members were conscious. 2 had managed to get themselves into pressure suits. The third, the captain, had a traumatic injury to their lower body and hadn't been able to manage the suit alone. Erin was already kneeling beside the captain before I'd finished getting my bearings. She was running her suit's medical scanner and talking in the slow, clear cadence she used when she was being understood by someone in pain, not her usual precise brevity, but something different, something patient. She had maybe 300 words of spoken Veth, not enough for anything complicated, but enough for this. I see you. I am helping. You are not alone. I got the other 2 moving toward the docking collar. They were steady enough, shaken. One of them with a hand injury they were managing with the focused quiet of someone putting pain in a drawer they could open later. I got them through. The captain's name was Orev. I learned this later. At the time, I only knew them as the being Erin was carefully, methodically getting into a pressure suit with 2 injured hands and no help from the suit's wearer, who was conscious but barely, their tendrils flat against their temples in the way I'd come to understand meant shock. She talked the whole time. I couldn't make out everything she was saying. I could hear the rhythm of it, the slow, regular cadence, the same phrases in different configurations, the patience of someone who understood that you kept talking not because the words were landing, but because the voice was. She carried Orev through the collar herself, small woman, all deliberateness. I met her at the far side, and we got Orev into the shuttle's medical bay together, working in the close silence of people who didn't need to narrate the steps. The Veth rescue vessel arrived 48 minutes later. We transferred the crew. We answered Saris's questions by comm. We docked. We went through debrief. I wrote the incident report and Erin corrected 3 things in it and she was right about all 3, and I filed the final version at 200 station time. Somewhere in the middle of the debrief, with Saris taking notes and Pralovas standing very still in their receiving way, Erin looked across the table at me and said, without any particular expression, "Good work today." "You too," I said. "I know," she said, which was for Erin Voss the closest thing to a speech. The months had a different quality after that. Not nothing happening, plenty happened. The framework expanded. A new protocol for joint patrol operations was drafted, revised again, revised a 3rd time by Erin, who found 2 substantive errors and 1 passage that wasn't wrong but was written in a way that would cause problems in 5 years when context shifted. A 2nd human Veth orbital facility was approved in the inner system. I trained 6 new integration specialists and watched them learn the same things I'd learned, faster because they had a roadmap, slower because a roadmap is not the same as the territory. Tesavok started stopping me more often in corridors. We developed something I couldn't quite call a friendship, but was closer to it than anything else in my vocabulary. They asked questions about humans in the oblique Veth way, which was to ask about everything except the thing they were actually curious about, and wait to see if you'd find your way there. I usually did. Their actual questions were mostly about why humans maintained close relationships with beings who frustrated them. I told them that frustration and closeness weren't separate categories for us. Sometimes the closeness was the source of the frustration. That was part of how we knew it was real. Tesavok's tendrils moved in a slow spiral, considering. "This seems painful," they said. "Yes," I said. "But the alternative is worse." "The alternative," they said carefully, "being the absence of the closeness." "Right. We also find absence painful," Tesavok said, "but we do not typically court it in order to confirm the presence." "No," I said, "you're probably smarter about it than we are." They were quiet for a while, their tendrils drifted. "The human woman Voss, she is important to you." I didn't answer for a moment. The corridor was empty except for us. The ventilation ran its steady breath around us. "Yes," I said. "You remain," Tesavok said. "You do not ask for what you want. You do your work and you remain." "That's about right." "Why?" I thought about it. Really thought about it, Not the version I kept ready for the middle of the night hours, but the genuine thing. Because she told me what she needed, and she was right about what she needed, and what I want doesn't change what she needs. I paused. And because, here is the thing I don't know how to explain: being here, doing the work, being useful, being someone she can count on even when she isn't thinking about me as anything other than a colleague, that's not nothing. That's not the thing I want, but it's not nothing. Tesavok performed the short bow held long. You carry the resonance, they said, even when the signal does not arrive where you sent it. I looked at them. Amavith explained the concept to us more fully after the incident, they said. We have been thinking about it in other contexts. Signal does not always arrive where it was sent. It arrives where it was meant. The meaning is not always apparent at the time of sending. You're saying I should wait and see. I am saying that signals sent into resonance drift do not disappear, Tesavok said. They simply have not yet arrived. The second year had a different texture than the first. In the first year, I'd been building, learning the station, the protocols, the specific grammar of how two species communicated when they were trying to, and the even more specific grammar of how they miscommunicated when they weren't. Learning Aaron's silences and what they meant. Learning what my own silences meant, which turned out to be different from what I'd assumed. In the second year, I inhabited what I'd built. My Veth gesture language became fluent enough that the younger Veth crew members started treating me the way they treated their own junior colleagues, the comfortable disregard of someone who was no longer interesting as a novelty. This was, as best I could determine, the highest social honor the Veth could confer on an outsider. You had stopped being a guest. You were just someone who was there. The framework's joint patrol program launched in the 4th month of the second year. Aaron was part of the operational design team. I wasn't. My role was in integration infrastructure rather than operational planning, and the distinction mattered, though it had taken me a while to accept that it mattered without resenting it. There was a ceremony. The Veth had ceremonies for things like this, long and careful, and filled with specific scent patterns that the Veth released involuntarily in moments of communal meaning, and that humans couldn't smell at all, which Tesavok had told me was perhaps a mercy since the emotion was often overwhelming. I watched Aaron receive the Veth citation of commendation from Perlovas, a flat disc of hammered metal with her name inscribed in 3 languages, Veth pictograph, Galactic Standard, and the linear script that Amavith had told me was the Veth's oldest written form, used now only for formal acknowledgments of exceptional contribution. She turned it over in her hands with the expression of someone who didn't know what to do with being seen, and had decided to treat the object of acknowledgement as a scientific specimen until she figured it out. She caught me watching and gave me a look I couldn't parse. After the ceremony, we ended up in the observation bay. Not entirely by design, it was where I went when I needed to think, and she developed the same reflex at some point without either of us marking when. The gas giant turned outside. Its amber bands had shifted over the year, one of them deepening toward mahogany. The Veth astronomers tracked these cycles and had the next 6 mapped, each one slightly different from the last. You've been here 2 years, Aaron said. She was sitting on the far end of the bench. Not as far as she used to sit. Little over, I said. Longest posting I've had, she said, by a lot. Same. She was quiet. Outside, the cargo haulers made their slow migrations. I knew their schedules by now. I knew which running lights belonged to which vessel, which were heavy and which light by the angle of their docking approach. I've been thinking, she said, about the resonance drift. What about it? Amavith told me something during the analysis phase that I didn't fully process at the time. She turned the citation disc in her hands. About how the signal doesn't disappear. It just takes longer to resolve. The field doesn't block it. It holds it. I heard something similar, I said. There's a version of the universe where I have better timing, she said. And a version where I'm better at knowing what I need before I need it. and a version where I didn't spend 2 years learning that you were the only person on this station I could actually count on, in the specific way that counts, not just to do the job, but to do the job and still. She stopped. I waited. To still be a person about it, she said. To still see me as a person about it. There's something I do. She looked at the disc. When I'm under pressure, I get reduced, even to myself. I become the function, and everyone around me eventually stops being able to see anything but the function. She looked at me. You didn't. I saw the function, I said honestly. The function is remarkable. I know, she said. And this time it sounded different, less defense, more acknowledgement, more like she was receiving the information than deflecting it. But you also argued with me about the secondary airlock protocol. You were wrong, but you argued the whole way through, and then you were gracious about being wrong, which is almost as infuriating. You spent 4 sessions with Tesavok learning about Veth oxygen management philosophy, and came back and talked about it for 20 minutes when it had nothing to do with anything actionable. You left a protein bar on my console at 200 when you thought I wasn't going to mention it. You didn't mention it, I said. I know, I still noticed. She looked at the gas giant. You just stayed. I told you I didn't need you and you didn't leave. Not in the way I meant. You just rearranged, and you kept being there. Not in the way I asked you not to be, but in every other way. There was a lot of work, I said. Plenty of reasons to stay. She gave me a look. Don't do that. Do what? Make it smaller than it is. You knew what you were doing. So did I. I was just, she exhaled slowly, not ready. And then I was somewhere in the middle of the 2nd year and I still wasn't ready, but I kept noticing that you were there, and the noticing started to feel like something I'd miss. I looked at her. I'm better at numbers than at this, she said, so I'm just going to say it directly. She picked the disc back up, turned it over once, put it down again. I don't want to stop working with you, and I also want something else. And those two things used to feel like a conflict, and now they feel like the same thing. The observation bay was quiet around us. The gas giant turned. One of the amber bands caught the distant sun's light in a way that made it look, just for a moment, like something moving through fire and coming out the other side unchanged and brighter for it. I've been here, I said. I'm not going anywhere. I know, she said. I know you know, I said. That's the thing you've known for a while. What changed? She was quiet for a long moment. You, she said finally. Not in the way that sounds. You didn't change. You were the same. That's what changed it. I let that sit between us for a moment. Also, she said, and there was something close to wry in it. Tesavok told me what you said about frustration and closeness. Tesavok talks a lot, I said. They like you. They talk to people they like. She turned toward me on the bench. Full turn, full attention, Aaron undivided, which I'd seen directed at framework revisions and distress signals and Amavith's gravitational data, and had been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, to have directed at me. I'm not good at this. You're good at everything you put effort into, I said. I've watched you for 2 years. That's different. Is it? She thought about that. Her fingers were still on the citation disc. No, she said slowly. I suppose it isn't. A pause. I'm going to be bad at it for a while. I've been patient so far. Something moved across her face that I hadn't seen there before. Not quite a smile. The thing that comes just before one when someone has decided to let the thing be what it is. Yes, she said. You have. Orev visited the station 7 months later, during the framework's 2nd-year integration review. They were recovered fully. Veth regenerative capacity for their lower body tissues was remarkable, and Tesavok had explained to me once, at considerable length, the biological mechanisms involved. Orev moved with a slight alteration in their gait now, a Veth medical marker equivalent to a scar, and Tesavok had told me that in Veth culture this was marked with the same word as the resonance drift field, a place where the body remembered an earlier shape. They sought us out together. This had become, gradually, a thing that happened, people finding us together, because together was where we increasingly were. Not always. We still worked separate roles, still occupied different corridors and different schedules and different spheres of expertise that didn't always overlap, but with a constancy that had developed slowly, the way things develop when you're not watching for them. Orv performed the longbow. I returned it. Erin gave it her best attempt. She'd been working on the angles for months and had mostly gotten them right, and Orev's tendrils moved in the slow spiral I recognized as warmth. "You came," Orev said. Their translated voice was lighter than I'd expected, a tenor, clear and slightly surprised sounding. "When the signal reached you." "The signal reached us," Erin said. "We were closest." "Yes," Orev said, "but signals reach many points. Not all points respond." They looked between us. Their tendrils drifted gently, reading the air with whatever information the air held. "We have a word," they said, "for the relationship between a signal and the point it reaches. Not the point it was sent to, the point it arrives at. We call this Varethas. It means, approximately, the resonance finds its home." The room's ventilation ran softly around us. Somewhere down the corridor, footsteps passed and faded. "Your signal found us," Orev said. "You were not sent to us, but the resonance brought you and we received you, and I have returned to tell you that we remember the receiving." The long bow again held longer. "This is Veth practice. We believe the relationship between a signal and its point of arrival is permanent. You cannot unsend. You cannot unreceive. The resonance persists." They left after a while to attend the review sessions. Erin and I found ourselves in the observation bay. We kept ending up there. It had become our place the way things become places. Through repetition, through the quality of light at a particular hour, through the accumulated weight of conversations that had happened there and changed things. "Varethas," she said. "The resonance finds its home," I said. She looked at the gas giant. Its deeper band had darkened further over the months, the mahogany settling toward something older. In another 100 years it would shift again. The Veth astronomers had the next 6 cycles mapped, each one slightly different from the last, none of them exactly like what had come before. "I didn't need you," she said. "For a long time I genuinely didn't. That wasn't just something I told you." "I know," I said. "But I need," she stopped, found it. "I think there's a difference between needing someone and wanting them to be there. And I think I confused those for a long time. I thought the first one was the only real one, the only legitimate one, that if I didn't need something, wanting it was just noise, something to manage." "You're allowed to want things," I said. "I know that now." She looked at me with those cloud-gray eyes, full attention. "You let me figure that out at my own speed. You didn't push. You didn't make it something I had to manage. You just worked and showed up and were exactly who you were and waited for me to catch up." "I wasn't exactly waiting," I said. "I was just here." "Yes," she said, "that's what I mean." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a cargo hauler made its slow approach to the upper docking ring, running lights blinking in the long intervals that had come, over 2 years, to feel like part of the station's breathing. "Amaveth told me something during the briefing," she said, "about how the drift doesn't amplify a signal so it's louder. It amplifies it so it's truer, removes the distortion that distance creates. The signal that arrives through a drift field is cleaner than the one that was sent." "I didn't know that part," I said. "I've been sitting with it." She looked back at the window. "So what I'm saying is that 2 years in the drift might not be entirely a waste." "It wasn't a waste," I said. "No." She turned toward me on the bench fully, the way she turned toward things she decided to look at directly. "I don't think it was either." Her hand found mine on the bench between us. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Just there, warm and certain, the way things settle into the places they were always going to reach. Outside, the gas giant turned. Its bands moved in their slow, vast rotation, each one a different color and age, all of them part of the same world going about its ancient business in the indifferent, beautiful dark. The Veth-Terran cooperation framework ran for 30 more years before it was subsumed into a broader multi-species compact that we spent the better part of a decade helping to negotiate. Tesavok retired 6 years into our second posting and sent me a message through the diplomatic channel that came out to, approximately, "The signal has reached a resting place," which was the closest Veth had to farewell. I kept it the way you keep things you don't want to lose. Orev became the captain of a long-range survey vessel and sent occasional dispatches from places that weren't on any chart I recognized. They had a talent, I came to understand, for venturing into territory that hadn't been mapped yet and coming back to report on what they'd found. This seemed right for someone who had once sent a signal through a drift field not knowing where it would land and found themselves received. Aaron drafted the hazardous materials handling protocol that became the template for every subsequent interspecies facility in the compact. 3 versions of it are still in use. 2 of the 3 still have her name in the revision history. She became, in the years that followed, exactly what she'd always been in the making. Someone whose expertise was so thoroughly grounded in the real that it resisted simplification, whose corrections always made things better, whose tone remained difficult, and whose work remained indispensable in a way that could not be separated from each other. She got better at this too, the human parts, the feeling parts, the being seen parts. Not because she changed, but because she learned that the function and the person were not separate categories. The way she'd learned, in 8 months of being watched by someone who kept showing up, that frustration and closeness were not separate categories either. We were complicated. We were sometimes bad at it, which is the part nobody tells you about, that you can wait and be patient and do everything right for 2 years and still spend the 3rd year learning how to argue in a way that doesn't damage anything. We learned. We had the specific arguments that people have when both of them are accustomed to being right, and one of them is better at admitting it than the other, and I will leave it to you to work out which of us was which. What I know is this. On a Tuesday, the particular kind of Tuesday, when nothing has gone wrong yet, but the day has a weight to it, the way certain days do before they show you what they are, a woman told me she didn't need me. She was right. She didn't. She was doing her job, doing it well, and she would have kept doing it without me, and the framework would have been fine, and Orev would have been rescued, and the hazardous materials protocol would have been revised, and all the work would have been done. That's not why I stayed. I stayed because she was right about what she needed, and what she needed was real, and real things deserve respect even when they're inconvenient. I stayed because staying was the work, and the work was real, and you don't walk away from real things just because they're asking you to wait. I stayed because there is a kind of love that is not about getting something. That is just about being present in the way the work requires, in the way the situation requires, in the way the person requires, and trusting that the signal you're carrying will find its way. The resonance doesn't interact with mass. It interacts with signal. And a signal sent into the drift does not disappear. It simply hasn't arrived yet. On a station orbiting a gas giant whose amber bands turned slowly through their centuries-long cycles, a Veth administrator named Tesavok once told me something I kept in the way you keep things you don't fully understand until they become the most obvious thing in the world. She told me she didn't need me. She was right. I stayed anyway. And the signal, patient as light through deep space, found exactly where it was always going to land. There is a thing that happens on long postings, in the quiet intervals between crises, where the work settles into a rhythm, and the rhythm becomes a kind of life. You stop measuring time in weeks and start measuring it in the texture of days. Which days have the morning briefing and which don't. Which days Tesavok is likely to be in the main corridor at a particular hour, which days the engineers run the atmospheric recalibration and fill the whole lower ring with the faintly metallic smell of processed air. I had learned, sometime in the middle of the second year, that Erin measured time the same way. She didn't talk about it directly. She wasn't someone who talked about things directly unless the directness was tactical, unless she needed the clarity in order to act. What she did was mention, in passing, small things. The day the Veth kitchen staff changed their preparation schedule for the morning meal and how it had thrown off her sense of the morning. The way the observation bay light changed color in the hour before the artificial night cycle started. The fact that she had learned, apparently without noticing she was learning it, to read the cargo hauler running lights and tell them apart. "The one on the outer ring rotation is running lighter today," she said one morning, about 8 months into the second year. We were both in the observation bay. It was early, before the day cycle briefing started, and we had taken to spending this hour there with coffee and without talking much, which was its own kind of conversation. "New contract," I said. The Veth outer survey team finished their sample collection. The mineral haulers won't be heavy again until the next survey cycle. She looked at me. "When did you learn that?" "Tessavok mentioned it 3 weeks ago. I filed it away." "You file everything away. You correct everything that's been filed wrong. We make a reasonable team." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. With Erin, sounds that weren't quite laughs were the closest you got for a long time. I had learned to track them the way I'd learned to track the cargo hauler schedules without noticing, until the noticing was already complete. "We do," she said, and then after a pause, "I didn't used to think about teams much. I thought about capability, whether the people around me were capable. Whether I was capable, teams seemed like a management concept. What do you think about them now?" She looked at the window. The gas giant turned. "I think about the shuttle," she said. "When you held the contact on the third pass, you didn't say anything. You didn't signal. You just held it and I hit the override and it worked, and neither of us had planned it." "We'd worked together long enough," I said. "That's what a team is," she said. "That's the thing I didn't understand before. It's not a management concept. It's just working alongside someone long enough that you stop having to explain everything." I watched the gas giant turn. "Yeah," I said. She drank her coffee. I drank mine. Outside, the cargo hauler made its light, unhurried approach to the docking ring. "I want to stay on the second posting," she said, "when the option comes up." I hadn't expected that. "Is it coming up?" "Saris mentioned it to me 2 weeks ago. There's a permanent integration position being created. It would be a 4-year commitment." She looked at me. "I've been thinking about it." "What have you been thinking?" "That I didn't expect to want to stay anywhere this long," she said. "That's new for me." I held that for a moment. Is the posting the reason, or is there something else? She looked at me in the steady, full way she had now when she was saying something she'd decided to say. "There's something else," she said. "The posting is good. The work matters, but it's not only the posting." "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. We finished our coffee. The day cycle started. We went to the morning briefing, and I sat on my side of the table and she sat on hers, and Commander Saris went through the resource allocation report, and I nodded through most of it, and the planet turned outside the window, and we both stayed. The thing about waiting, the thing I'd never fully been taught and had to learn the slow way, the 2-year way, the way that left marks like the Veth's resonant scars, is that waiting is not passive. People talk about patience like it's the absence of action, like the person who waits is the person who does nothing while they wait. That's not what patience is. Patience is doing the work while you wait. Patience is being so fully present in the thing in front of you that the waiting doesn't hollow you out. Patience is trusting that the signal you're carrying has its own trajectory, its own timeline, and that you can't hurry it without distorting it. The way a resonance drift field amplifies a signal truer by not interfering with its natural path. I had not been, all my life, a patient person. I had been a thorough person, a methodical person, someone who prepared and planned and executed. Patience, in the specific sense I'm describing, was something I learned on Orbital Station Meridian, in the year that followed a Tuesday when a woman told me she didn't need me. I learned it from the work, from the Veth, who had been navigating relationships between species for long enough that they'd stopped expecting them to resolve quickly. From Tessavok, who stopped me in corridors and asked questions that were never about the thing they were actually curious about, and who had more patience for indirect approaches than any being I'd ever encountered. From the gas giant, which turned at its own pace and was never in a hurry about it, and was never anything other than what it was. I learned it from watching Erin, too, though not in the way it might sound. Not from watching her and wanting her and learning to wait for her. From watching how she worked. The way she didn't rush her corrections, even when speed was an option. The way she sat with data until she'd found the thing that was actually wrong, not just the thing that was easiest to find. The way she returned the Veth bow worse than me for months, and then better, because she kept doing it until she'd gotten it right. She had patience with the work. She had very little patience with people, which I think she knew and had made a kind of peace with. What changed over 2 years was that she got better at distinguishing between the two, at understanding that the people around her were sometimes also work, not in the instrumental sense, not as problems to be solved, but in the sense that relationships require the same kind of attention and revision that protocols require. That getting them right takes as long as it takes, that you don't rush the correction just because you found the error. She told me all of this eventually. Not in one conversation, but across many, in the way you tell someone things when you've decided to start, incrementally, in the spaces between other conversations, in the hours before the day cycle started when the observation bay was quiet, and the gas giant turned in its ancient, unhurried way. I think I used to treat people like bad data, she said once. Something to minimize the impact of, keep the variables controlled. That explains the calibration walk counting, I said. She gave me a look that was almost fond. The calibration walk counting was accurate. I know it was. That doesn't mean it was the whole picture. No, she said, it wasn't the whole picture. A pause. You were a variable I couldn't calibrate. You kept not behaving the way variables are supposed to behave. What are variables supposed to do? Respond to controls. Respond to boundaries. When I told you I didn't need you, the variable was supposed to recede. I didn't recede. No, she said, you rearranged, and kept showing up in every configuration I hadn't thought to restrict. Something moved across her face. That almost smile fully arrived this time. It was very annoying. I know, I said. I know you know, she said. And there it was, the phrase we'd turned into a kind of shorthand, a private language built from the specific texture of 2 years spent in each other's company. The way you build these things without noticing, until one day you find yourself fluent in something you never consciously studied. Outside, the gas giant turned. Its burgundy band had deepened over the months to something close to the color of old wine, and the Veth astronomers had noted the progression in their cycle logs and added it to the record of the 100 years. They'd been watching this particular planet's surface tell its long, slow story. I thought about Orev, out somewhere in unsurveyed space, sending signals into drift fields and finding out where they landed. I thought about Tessavok, at their resting place. Tendrils drifted in the ease of someone who had carried the resonance long enough to set it down. I thought about a Tuesday, 700 days ago, and a woman at a window, and a conversation that had ended with a word that turned out to be the beginning of something. I thought about how the signal had not disappeared, how it had traveled through the drift, how it had arrived somewhere it was never sent and been received there, and how the relationship between the sending and the receiving was, as Orev had once told us, permanent. You cannot unsend. You cannot unreceive. The resonance persists. Aaron's hand was warm in mine. Outside, the planet turned. The cargo haulers made their migrations. The station breathed its recycled, shared atmosphere breath, two species exhalations cycling through the same filters, becoming, molecule by molecule, indistinguishable. There was something in that I found beautiful. There was something in all of it I found beautiful. I'd been here 2 years. I wasn't going anywhere.